L-tryptophan. L-tryptophan is an essential amino acid that we need, one of the aromatic amino acids. Very critical for brain function, for immunity, and for hormone functions. So that many of us are deficient in this particular nutrient, and one of the manufacturers of L-tryptophan decided that if they could genetically engineer their organism to produce more of it, they'd have a competitive edge over their other manufacturers. He did that, even ran it through the mouse study, and everything looked great. It was a very respectable company. Within 2 weeks after commercialization of the product, though, the nutrient supplement, had 80 people dead from anaphylactic shock, and 10,000 people are now permanently incapacitated as a result of a new product, a new amino acid that was produced by those bacteria as a consequence of changing the spatial relationship and the environment that it was being produced in then, produced a product that took us 12 years to identify that lethal quantity, because it was less than 0.1% of the product was this lethal component, the 3-PAA. So people say, well, we've never had any deaths from it. Well, it's not true. And we look at some of the other aspects, they are chronically toxic rather than acutely toxic. So it may take 20 years for it to show up, or 30 years, maybe even 2 generations, for some of those effects to show, as we're seeing in some of the studies that are finally being conducted now, that should have been conducted 35 or 40 years ago. So that we can go down the list. Shiva Dairy and his group at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology have looked at some of the general changes that occur when you disrupt the integrity of the genetic code. Looking at the Roundup Ready and the BT corn and canola and soybeans, now alfalfa and cotton that we have out, and looking at what the physiologic changes are that this genetic change brings about. What they find is that one of the unintended consequences is a shutting down of a physiologic process we call C1 metabolism. C1 metabolism is just one carbon compounds that are eliminated from the body as toxic waste products from metabolism, usually formaldehyde. So that formaldehyde doesn't build up in our body. It's a category 1 carcinogen. But in the genetically engineered plants, formaldehyde builds up because there's no longer a pathway that's open for breaking it on down to carbon dioxide and water and eliminating it from the system. So formaldehyde builds up. As formaldehyde builds up, then you have a depletion of glutathione, which is one of your primary antioxidants in your body for immunity. So that if you're going to eat a lot of genetically engineered foods, as we do in the States, eat those for life, and you see as that formaldehyde builds up as a category 1 carcinogen. Other aspects to it. When you go to the undertaker, ask for a discount, because that's what he uses in his fluid to kind of preserve you for a little while. There's serious concerns with all of it. So David Gee, the World Health Organization, as he's written his 3 volumes now on late lessons learned from early warnings, I think his 4th volume is going to be just the GMO and the glyphosate. We've had plenty of warnings. We don't understand what the process is fully, and we're not evaluating what the end products are other than the traded characteristics that we're hoping to produce. So if there are many things that are coming on, or that are happening that we're not necessarily aware of, We can't tell the difference usually in between a GMO and a non-GMO. Animals can. You can see in these slides, the bottom ones are isogenic lines. You see the parent line over there that the mice really took after. These two bags got left at the back of the warehouse. After the sales season, they were cleaning up. This is an isogenic triple stack over here, derived from this parent, and the rats didn't bother at all. Mice didn't touch it. Now that may be because of their sensitivity to the formaldehyde. Triple stacked corn and GMO will have anywhere from 10 to 200 parts per million formaldehyde. We can't smell that usually, not sensitive enough, and there may be some other factors that are involved. Then these 2 ears were left up in the tree for 9 months. You can tell that the parent line, the non-GMO, was kind of a favorite food for the squirrel. Even though it went through the winter, they just did a little nibbling there. Had 2 years ago, we had Roundup Ready sweet corn, deregulated and available for our growers. Had a farmer in Florida come up, talk to me before my presentation. He said, I think GMO sweet corn is the best thing since sliced bread. I said, what makes you think it's so good? He said, well, I grow sweet corn in the winter months, ship it up to the Yankees up north for them to consume. He said, I've grown sweet corn for 30 years, and this is the first year that the raccoons didn't take a single ear. I said, so you want to feed that to your grandkids and your great-grandkids? They're a little smarter, as Gilbert Hofstadter said on Season on that bottom slide there. Said maybe the mice are trying to tell me something that I ought to be aware of. And we should be very seriously concerned about not just the genetic contamination from the promiscuous movement of that genetic material, but also from the unintended consequences from all the other proteins, amino acids that are produced, as we saw with the L-tryptophan. We know with the Roundup Ready insertion, fairly simple insertion, there are anywhere from 20 to 200 new proteins that we have never seen before in science. They're not in any databases. We don't know what their allogenicity is or what their function or activity is in the biological system. Well, that second thing and factor that we need to consider is the products that are going on and accumulating in our crop systems. Not necessarily just in the GMO, but just in our excess usage of them as we're currently using them in the system. 85% of our genetically engineered plants are engineered for resistance to this one herbicide, glyphosate. Most widely used chemical. In every jug of glyphosate, there is a series of different nitrosamines. Now, it's a product of manufacturing that they can't remove. The nitrosamines are your tobacco carcinogen. So that in every jug, you're going to have 4 or 5 different forms of the nitrosamine or nitrosoglyphosate type of compounds to start with. Very simple compound, just the simplest amino acid. Over here, glycine. Then you have a PO3. It's a synthetic amino acid. You look at it in the U.S. with Roundup Ready alfalfa now that we've been growing for 2 years. This figure is up to about 300,000 pounds, or 300 million pounds that we use every year in agriculture, and we use another 250 or 300 million pounds in forestry and homeowners and railroad and utility right-of-ways and other sources. So about 500 million pounds of glyphosate goes out every year. You can see the different crops that it goes on. It's not just the GMO crops. They get the lion's share of it, but they don't necessarily have the highest residual levels in those crops because it's now used by a lot of our growers as a desiccant before harvest, the harvest stage. When you put it out on the plant at that stage in growth, the only place a systemic chemical can go is into the grain. And so in garbanzo beans, Canadian Food Service Inspection Authority, finding 5,200 parts per billion in glyphosate. Well, it takes 100 parts per billion will completely disrupt your GI microbiome that you rely on for your immunity, for your general mental condition, for your absorption of nutrients, and all your other factors there. So many times, greater toxicity in those materials. The consequence of that indiscriminate use, sick soils, vanishing ecological support, deteriorating crop and animal health, and increased human suffering. I'll review some of the aspects that we see in those different areas then here relative to it, but to understand glyphosate, you have to understand what it's doing, what its activity is. It was first invented in 1957, first patented by Stauffer Chemical Company in 1964, used as a way to clean steam pipes and boilers. Patented as a chelator. It's a mineral chelator, very broad spectrum, so that it will essentially immobilize any positively charged cation. That would be your magnesium, your calcium, your iron in the boiler system, so that you can descale it, get it out of there. But in a plant, those are also essential minerals. And then your iron and copper and zinc, and cobalt, molybdenum, and manganese. All of those other elements are all chelated by glyphosate. You see that mineral immobilization was the first patent on it. 10 years after that patent as a mineral chelator, Monsanto patented as a very broad spectrum herbicide. Kills everything. It's a broad spectrum herbicide because it's a broad spectrum mineral chelator. Those minerals are the cofactors for enzyme function. If you want to shut down an enzyme function, you get a chelator that will tie up the mineral that's the catalyst or the cofactor for that particular enzyme. In this case, with glyphosate, it chelates the manganese. Also chelates the cobalt. Both of those right up at the start of the schemate pathway to shut that whole pathway down then. Gives the plant a bad case of AIDS. And it's the soil-borne diseases then that are actually performing the herbicidal action to this plant that now has no immunity or no resistance to any of those organisms. In 2000, Monsanto patented it also as a broad spectrum antibiotic. It's an antibiotic, though, against the beneficial organisms in the environment, those that provide protection to many of the pathogens, that suppress pathogenic activity, or that we need for digestion in our GI tract, as well as for bees, lizards, frogs, cattle, sheep, all the other animals that all require those microorganisms in our GI GI tract in order to function. Glyphosate's toxic to the beneficiaries, but Clostridium, Salmonella, Listeria, E. coli, and your pathogens are all resistant. They have a resistant mechanism. So when you have a void in the ecology, that void is rapidly filled by other organisms. And we see that build up then of the pathogenic forms that are resistant to glyphosate overtake then that microbiome, whether it's in the gut or whether it's in the ecology, that would normally be there. It's a synthetic amino acid again, so that Anthony Samsel's research is showing that good evidence that it can actually replace glycine, which occupies or comprises about 50% of many of our enzymes and proteins. Glyphosate can substitute for that, the glycine part of it, leaves a tail out that modifies then the function of that protein so that it either can't function or it's producing additional materials that, again, we haven't ever seen before. It can cause protein folding, very similar to what we see with mad cow disease or wasting disease or Creutzfeldt-Jakob, to put the additional pressure then on that protein as far as a function. As a chelator, Birdie's research on mad cow disease indicated that it was the phosmet that was probably responsible for that change, that protein folding, because with the phosmet, which is a sister to glyphosate, as you put that insecticide down the spine of the animal, it would chelate the copper that's part of the brain proteins, the metallo part, that's the cofactor again, or transition element in those functions, and replace that with manganese so that you had a 2-valent state being replaced with a potential 6-valent state mineral. And Purdy felt very strongly in his research that that was what brought about the protein folding that converted that protein into a chemically resistant, self-replicating entity then in the animal, causing mad cow, the same type of thing with wasting disease in deer and elk and other animals, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob, the variant form of that, and humans that we see is on a major increase epidemiologically. As a synthetic amino acid, it hasn't been around for very long. Haven't had an opportunity for very many organisms to adapt to degrading it, so it can be very persistent. Half-life in a good agricultural soil, silt loam, silty clay loam, is about 22 years. We're talking generations if you're looking at full degradation of it, so that it can be tied up by chelation, so that it's no longer a toxic herbicide, but it can be toxic in many of these other ways as an antibiotic, in spite of that chelation detoxification as an herbicide. Again, some other characteristics, just to demonstrate some of that chelation activity. You can see that the reason why Monsanto said on their label, don't add anything to glyphosate, and especially don't add your minerals, because if it chelates in the tank, it's not going to be able to chelate in the plant and tie up all of the enzymes then that you need for herbicidal activity. And you see that manifest when you get that flashing, that yellowing, just shows that it's chelating the manganese and the magnesium and other elements that are required for photosynthesis and chlorophyll function. You see that general condition. Well, when we added a little bit of zinc in the tank mix. You can see really excellent weed control over here without the zinc. Add a little zinc. You chelate it in the tank and you lose all of your herbicidal activity because it can't chelate the manganese and the zinc then in the plant to shut down the shikimate pathway. It's already detoxified in that area. And you can see the chelation correlation, chelation stability constants here for different minerals, so that all of them are going to be chelated and immobilized, but there will be some preferences or some greater tie-up of some of those materials that go through. It doesn't take very much. Just a 40th of the herbicidal rate will reduce the uptake of iron and manganese by 50 to 80%. And then translocation in the plant is further impeded. So you have 80 to 90% or 95% of those minerals that are never going to make it to the tissues where they're required for growth of the plant. This is at 11 grams per acre, a 40th of the herbicidal rate, and about half an ounce per acre, or 12 parts per billion. So it's a very powerful chelator, very powerful antibiotic in there. Compare that with the 450 or 560 grams that goes out as a normal herbicidal rate. With resistant weeds, we go 2 and 3 to 5 times that rate, trying to still get it to take out the weeds. Then a very powerful tool for us in ag because it's systemic, water soluble. You just squirt it on the plant and it does its own distribution throughout the plant, different than a lot of our other herbicides where you have to have good contact. It distributes, it accumulates in the root tips and the shoot tips and the reproductive structures. So that 80% of that glyphosate that's applied gets into the plant, is going to stay in the plant as long as the plant's alive, or as part of it. You can't wash it off because it's in the cell. About 20% will move down into the root system where it shuts down the plant's defense systems, makes it very susceptible to all the soil-borne pathogens, Fusarium, and Rhizoctonia, and Pythium, and Phytophthora, and all of those organisms, and shuts down the plant's resistance. As it moves out of that root system then, that 15 or 20%, stimulates the soil-borne pathogens because its antibiotic activity has removed their natural biological controls. And so you stimulate those that are resistant to it. Those are our pathogens. You see then that all of those beneficial organisms over here that help us in our crop growth and our nutrition are all very sensitive to glyphosate, so that the entire soil biology is changed with this very simple chemical. Very powerful material. Fielding of pumpkins planted diagonal to the, or perpendicular to the previous Roundup Ready corn rows that were there. So you can see where the glyphosate went out of those Roundup Ready corn roots into the soil, and you can see right where the corn rows were by the damage the next year to the pumpkins that were planted perpendicular to those rows in this field. Very persistent chemical, can be tied up, accumulate in the soil. I saw some data from CSIRO and silty clay loam soil in Australia. They did the analysis. The farmer had very good records of how much glyphosate had been applied to that farm, that field. They could account for 100% of the glyphosate that had been applied for 20 years in that soil because there had essentially been no degradation. In one of their fields, there wasn't even any AMPA, which is the first degradation product for glyphosate. That's a simple, just removal of one carbon. Increases the toxicity about 1.5-fold when that happens, but they weren't even getting that. That's a fairly common process biologically. It's the carbon phosphate lyase that's missing in the environment in most of our organisms. Is the reason why it's such a persistent chemical. Again, our label in the state says it's fine to apply glyphosate anytime before emergence of your seed. If you read the Israeli label, it says it's not safe to plant until up to 3 weeks after you apply your glyphosate, because it takes that long for it to be chelated with your calcium, iron, and manganese and other minerals in the soil, so it's not toxic to that new plant that you're putting out. Now, you may eventually get your plant, get your stand here, but it's going to be delayed and it's going to be stressed. It's not going to be as vigorous as it ought to be. You can see what happens even in the Roundup Ready plant, because there's nothing in the genetic engineering that does anything to the glyphosate. Just makes it so that you can put it on the plant without killing it. But you get onto a soil where you have low mineral availability, copper, manganese, or iron, or zinc. Many of your soils, I've looked at your soil test, you're very deficient in zinc, quite often manganese, quite often copper, sometimes even iron, and you can see that effect. Well, in Wisconsin, they recognized that they had soil environmental conditions that weren't conducive for good iron nutrition. They developed a simple $2 seed treatment with some ferrous iron. They went from 33 bushel up to 56 bushel per acre with just this simple seed treatment on it. When they applied their glyphosate, though, they went from that 33 bushel down to 8 bushel because they tied up their iron and also their manganese, especially here. And when they used the seed treatment, they brought them up to 19 bushel, not over to the 56, because they didn't recognize that they were also tying up a lot of other minerals, especially my research indicate that if they would have had not just the iron in here, but also some manganese, getting about 2 pounds per acre, manganese out compensates for the glyphosate, they'd have probably had that 56, maybe even 65 bushel yield to compensate for it. Again, you can see the reduced availability of those nutrients even in the Roundup Ready crops, because the genetic engineering, again, doesn't do anything to the chemical. It only gives the plant the ability to tolerate that chemical. And so long term, what we're seeing, and many farmers are saying, you know, a crop doesn't look as good as it used to. It doesn't have the vigor. Well, you ask an agronomist what's happening over here, and they'll say, well, it was a cold soil, it was a dry soil, there was too much residue on the surface. Well, yeah, we know that those will all reduce nutrient availability. But very few of them connect the dots back to glyphosate. You look at the study here with Ron Held, Stuttgart, Germany, comparing the 1-year use of glyphosate with the 6-year use, and you see that accumulative effect through the reduction of many of those essential nutrients the plant has to have. Again, it's a very powerful antibiotic, broad spectrum antibiotic to the beneficial organisms that make manganese and iron and other nutrients available. They can only be absorbed in the reduced form. So that's a biological process, and glyphosate is very toxic to Bacillus and Pseudomonas and a number of those organisms that are involved in making those minerals available. Our natural biological control organisms, Pseudomonads and other organisms here, hormone producers, are very sensitive to glyphosate. But our pathogens, and this is in a Roundup Ready soybean, Bob Kramer has shown that you get 500-fold increase in, or percent increase in root infection of your genetically engineered soybeans. So what do we have with soybeans? We have sudden death syndrome now caused by fusarium. The disease didn't exist before 1996. It's not a matter of just observing it and being more observant. The disease didn't exist before 1996. Because what glyphosate does is tie up the magnesium and the manganese that we can use as a seed treatment now, and we can eliminate this billion-dollar disease by compensating for the effects of glyphosate. I'll show you some of that. You see that powerful activity? This is a study that Bocaron Health set up for the first International Symposium on Glyphosate, Piracicaba, Brazil. But he had just a regular filter paper that he soaked in oxidized manganese and potassium permanganate. Plant can't utilize the oxidized form of manganese. It has to be biologically reduced. So he planted Roundup Ready soybeans in this, sprayed these with glyphosate, or he didn't spray the soybeans over on this side of the filter paper that we're growing, and you can see then that those organisms, soil organisms, were able to convert the oxidized manganese to the reduced manganese, so we started seeing a white filter paper showing up here in the root system from utilization of that nutrient. Very little activity where the plants had received the glyphosate as a foliar spray, and then it moved down into the root system and out into the soil to its damage. This is your monomycetes graminis growing in soil. What all of that brown is, we call it a dematiaceous fungus because it has a brown pigment to it, and we assume that that's melanin. When we analyze that on the synchrotron to see whether it's Mn+4 or Mn+2, you find that this is all bernicide. Mn4, it's calcium manganese phosphate, not available for the plant, it's just a bunch of gravel, but what it's done, what the pathogen has done, is it's tied up all of that manganese that would be available and necessary for the plant for its resistance to ward off this root and crown rot of wheat and barley that other cereals. Now what it does is it changes then the population and the function of many of those organisms in the soil, so that we have, as far as the manganese reducing organisms that would make manganese available, about a 10-fold reduction when we put the glyphosate out, and we have 10 or 12-fold increase in the oxidizers. As the fungus grows along the root system, oxidizes the manganese, essential for the shikimate pathway, and the plant becomes very susceptible then to this very serious root pathogen. In 2 weeks after we applied glyphosate as a ripening agent for sugarcane, we have wiped out the mycorrhizal. You can still see a little of it hanging on here. It's essentially dead, but sugarcane, very heavy mycorrhizal plant, C4 plant, and in 2 weeks after applying glyphosate as a desiccant or a ripening agent, we completely wiped it out. So that over the last 5 or 6 years, we've developed a nutritional ripening program where we use boron, molybdenum, and manganese to shift that physiology, to move sugar in, and rather than using the glyphosate, which merely stops the tiller growth, so that all the energy goes into sugar production on it. But using the nutritional program, we can get up to 2 tons per hectare more refined sugar than we can get with glyphosate. We get 1 to 2 With glyphosate, we get up to 2 tons more refined sugar because we removed the nitrate nitrogen. We started using it for sugar production by getting the molybdenum levels up so it can be used by the plant. Now the boron to move the extra sugar and the manganese to produce more sugar rather than shutting it down in that whole 4-week period, which is where your highest sugar production comes in. Soil aggregation is a biological process. Those organisms that are responsible for giving you that soil aggregation to get your water infiltration into your soil are all very sensitive to glyphosate. Both your fungi with the glomulins and the other products they produce, as well as the bacteria with the polysaccharides and the glutenating type of agents. So that you'll see that change in soil structure. Just some research of Dan Olson's in Wisconsin. What he finds in his organic field, these are just parts of split off fields here. Find with the organic, no glyphosate for 6 years. He can infiltrate 18 inches of water in that soil in an hour. Over here, where he's used glyphosate for 6 years, a ½ inch of water and it's starting to run off because you can't get it into the soil. You can't store it. Dave Brown shows the same thing up in North Dakota where he's gone into a biological program. He can store 12 inches of water. Doesn't worry about those 6 weeks or 2 months that it may not rain. The wipe his farmer, his neighbors out, he'll still have plenty of moisture to carry him through those cycles that we get every year in agriculture. Has that stability. Glyphosate changes that soil biology, that soil structure. You can't kill a plant with glyphosate in sterile soil. Can't drown a frog with water, but I'll try that. But in sterile soil, you only stun it, even though there are 291 enzymes that glyphosate inhibits. None of them are in a primary cycle that will kill the plant. As soon as that plant over here picks up, regenerates from the soil all of those minerals that have been tied up by glyphosate, in 2 weeks, all the lateral buds will break, and you're going to end up with a big bush that just takes off. And you see that in the weeds, too. You have a vascular system, an insect that breaks the vascular tie, so glyphosate doesn't make it down into the root system to compromise the resistance. Then that plant, in a couple of weeks, will start becoming a bush that you need a chainsaw on rather than being able to take it out with simple cultivation. It's the soil-borne pathogens that are your herbicidal mode of action with glyphosate. Been demonstrated many times. As a consequence of the stimulation of and the change in soil biology, we have over 40 diseases now that we refer to in our threat pathogens committee. I've served on for 40 years. We refer to these as re-emerging diseases. We used to have very practical economic controls for these 40 diseases that are now reaching epidemic proportions that are threatening the sustainability of our agricultural production. You'll see all of those common diseases with many of our crops. We have some new diseases. Cornospora, root rot on soybeans, common soil-borne pathogen or fungus. When you put the glyphosate on the foliage, though, it's much more than a root nibbler. It becomes a very serious pathogen because the glyphosate stimulates it to become a manganese oxidizer. Before that, it's just kind of neutral. In the soil, it's just a good saprify. It becomes a very serious pathogen when you put the glyphosate up here on those Roundup Ready roots or plants. I've seen as much as a 40% loss in the Midwest from this disease that before 1996 was of no consequence to us. It's like sudden death syndrome. Again, sudden death syndrome, it's the field in Illinois where the farmer didn't want to hang up his boom on his telephone poles, so for a half mile, he had a green island around all of his telephone poles because he didn't spray them with the glyphosate. You can tell it didn't get glyphosate. You'll see a little foxtail in those areas, a weed or two in it. But look at what happened where he sprayed his glyphosate and you lost 2 to 3 weeks or a month's production from it. That's prime photosynthetic time to get size on your beans, to get your weight, fill those late pods. And if you look at that, XP Gang at Iowa State published some data this year on showing them with the good magnesium, manganese treatment, you don't have this disease development. You compensate for the damage that the glyphosate is going to cause. Offset it, you keep the plant growing, you maintain its resistance mechanism then to the fusarium glycines that is responsible for this disease after the glyphosate is applied. Take all on the wheat, barley. It's a research field at the agronomy farm. Been the same crop rotation, same crop sequence, same fertility program and tillage program for 35, 40 years. It's a research field. It's supposed to be uniform throughout, yet a few years ago we had a situation where this half of the field had very severe root rot from take all, had the black scurf up on 1.5 inches up on the stem, black roots. The side over here had a lot of root nibbling, but it didn't wipe the crop out. The previous crop was Roundup Ready soybeans. Well, it was all planted Roundup Ready soybeans, and I got 1 dose of glyphosate. Why the difference? The plant breeder and I, an hour or so, driving around trying to figure out why it split down the field. Our wheat breeder was very upset. Followed up the studies. We saw this little red flag, and I said, well, what you do different here? Because that's where the change comes about. Doesn't match any of your drill wits. What caused it? I said, oh, that's the farm's flag, it's not mine. So we got the farm superintendent. Asked him why that field has very severe take-all in half of it, and just fairly mild in the other half. He said, I don't know, I've been driving around that for 3 weeks trying to figure it out. I said, well, what's your red flag for? And he thought for a minute, he said, oh, he said, you know, we have a lot of public that comes here, and I can't afford to have any weeds showing up in any of my fields. And he said, in those soybeans, we had some late weeds that emerged, and so I sent the crew out and said, you know, take those out. You didn't have any of them in this side, or enough of them to worry about. You could take them out by hand. So I didn't get the glyphosate on this side the previous year. One application of glyphosate essentially cost the crop on that 1/2. Marion Fernandez research in Canada showing that if you've applied glyphosate any time in the previous 3 years, you'll have an increase in fusarium root rot and an increase in your fusarium head scab. Head scab is a very serious problem because of the toxins that are produced, as well as the loss in grain yield. If you're applying it every year, there's a burn down, and that 3 to 6 times before your cereal crop, you're going to have a 300% increase in severity of your head scab. Andreas Tiedemann at our fusarium head scab forum that we have now, every year, because it's becoming such a serious disease for us, said that in his research, we no longer just have the toxins produced in the grain, it's now produced, the fungus is producing the deoxynivalenol and zearalenone and the T2 toxins and whatnot. In the root system, it's translocated up. You can have healthy looking grain that can be heavily contaminated with the mycotoxins. But he said, the interesting thing and serious concern is that when you use that straw for bedding, that you destroy fertility of your animals because the zearalenone levels, the estrogenic toxins, are high enough to destroy the fertility of your animals that are bedded on it.
Excuse me, can I ask a question on that, please? Mm-hmm. Would that toxicity swing the ratio between female and male calves?
Between what?
Female and male offspring?
You'll see the effect also on the male, but much greater on the female.
So it doesn't throw a balance between female and male, or does it?
You'll see it more severe on the female than you'll see the impact on the male.
So it'll throw up more than male calves. Thank you.
Now with glyphosate, that's different, because you'll see a greater impact on the sperm than you do on the ovary. And I'll get to that here in a minute. So that the use of glyphosate was the primary agronomic factor that is responsible for that increase in this disease. We can go into a number of these other diseases, as sugar beets. Even the USDA lab warned them that if you're going to go to the Roundup Ready sugar beets, make sure you don't have a problem with rhizoctonia or fusarium with your crown rods. If you do, you better take care of it, or else it's going to come back and bite you. We got away with it for 3 years. And then 2 years ago, we started harvesting 2 weeks early. We're harvesting about 3 to 4 weeks early now. Try and get it before the field infection becomes so severe that it rots the whole pile. This is a storage pile about 2 miles from my place in Idaho. 2 years ago, they lost 200,000 ton, or about $6 million worth of rotted in the pile before they could get it in for processing at the factory. That's lost to the farmer. These are all co-ops. You look at cotton. Ronnie Phillips in Texas. This is kind of a summary of 21 field experiments that he had. Found that with the Roundup Ready cotton, if you didn't get out there with our manganese or a manganese zinc foliar within 10 days after the glyphosate was applied, you lost 50% of the potential yield of that cotton. Drops all the bulbs. Well, glyphosate inhibits your auxin, your kynotin, and your gibberellin systems for growth in the plant, and it stimulates the abscisic acid, so that the most common symptom of glyphosate injury is bud and bulb rot or leaf drop on a plant. You can see that you can do some compensating for this year, but it doesn't do any compensating on a sustainable basis because of the biological change that's occurred along with that chelation and mobilization of the nutrient. And we can look at bulk potatoes. This was an interesting study at every potato farmer in the county that came in and limited just to the Russell Burbank. But you can see here with these growers, they're bulking. In other words, the potatoes that were over the 10-ounce size, that's where your premium is in the price. Then normally there'll be 35 to 40% of the crops should be those large tubers. You can see that many of the growers had dropped down to about half that, and some of them down here in bankruptcy level, only 5.4% of their crop was over 10 ounce, so they're all little potatoes. And we tried to figure out what the problem was. They had petiole analysis. These are all growers that have been growing potatoes all their lives. They know how to grow potatoes. They couldn't figure out what's happening. All of these that I've pulled here of the 50 are all corn as a pre-crop. What you see is where, when we finally got it boiled down, they hadn't used any glyphosate in the previous 2 years on that field, and you saw a fairly consistent high yield potential on those fields from their potatoes. Those that had used glyphosate once or twice in the previous year as a burn down, cut their yield, ascend their large tubers, got the bulking down, cut it about in half. And those that have jumped on the bandwagon for the Roundup Ready corn, all of these others are just normal corn. Those that have jumped on the bandwagon and planted the Roundup Ready corn are in a disaster because they had the biology from the root exudates in the plant, as well as that overall impact. You see the same thing when you compensate corn or soybeans, other areas. I'm dragging along here. I show you a lot of these other diseases. They affect breeding disease and citrus variegated chlorosis, the same type of thing, but the food and feed safety concerns are really serious here. And we can go through those. Just the reduced nutrient density in our crops predisposes us and our animals to many diseases, many conditions. These are the levels that our scientific studies show are problematic. These are where we should have a protection of about 100-fold lower than any of these levels if we're going to practice the precautionary principle. And so you look at those levels, and then you look at what our EPA says are perfectly safe levels in our food, and we're anywhere from 40 to as many as 1,400 times higher permitted in our food than any of the science would say has serious chronic health problems. It's interesting, Australia's drinking water says it's okay to have a full part per million in it. At 0.7 parts per million, you have anencephaly in your babies, where the brain doesn't develop, or usually miscarried. You'll see 1/10 of a part per million for disruption of the gut microbiome, or chronic fatigue, sudden infant death syndrome in humans, or chronic botulism in cattle and other animals. And read through some of those, just go, it's everywhere. Glyphosate's a very strong endocrine hormone disruptor, so that we have every day worldwide, you have a child born with cleft palate, indication of endocrine hormone disruption in that first 3 months of pregnancy. You see it in the animals. This chick would have a hard time even making it out of the egg. Perforated beak, the underbite, the overbite, all of those conditions. You have the Yakima situation, Yakima, Washington, where they had invasive weeds in the 3 rivers, so they started dumping rodeo or Roundup, glyphosate, into the river for invasive weed control. Kept it under the 0.7 parts per million, legal limitation by glyphosate, by the EPA, but in 2008, when they started dumping it in, within 2 years, we had a massive epidemic of anencephaly. Continued, we had public access to the information for 2 years. Medical personnel have been threatened with loss of their license if they talk about this. There's scientific and health censorship here. You see that effect of the antibiotic activity on your gut microbiome and its effect on brain function, mental condition, and also your immunity, all of your other situations that come into play here. Monica Kruger in Germany, Dr. Dana Stanley in Central Queensland University. Dana's done some tremendous research on the gut microbiome to actually look at it from a taxonomic standpoint, been able to literally cure very serious diseases that before all we could do was with a massive fecal transplant. She can do it with specific organisms, with diabetes, for autism, or many of the inflammatory bowel diseases now on it. But you can see that all of your beneficial organisms are very sensitive to glyphosate. You wipe them out, and then your pathogens all take over and fill that void to create a serious problem. See the chronic botulism. You see that whole effect where if you have good feed without the glyphosate in it, all of those beneficial organisms are going to completely suppress your Clostridium botulinum that produce that very powerful biological warfare toxin that's lethal out to the 9th decimal point isn't produced then. At a tenth of a part per million or lower or more of glyphosate in the feed, it wipes out your beneficials. You see the Clostridium growing, the botulism toxin then is produced. Cattle will start, one of the late symptoms is they'll try lapping water like a cat does because the muscles are all paralyzed from that neurotoxin, the bot neurotoxin. You see that effect. You see the effect on inflammatory bowel diseases from gut dysbiosis caused by the glyphosate. You wipe out those beneficial organisms. You see Clostridium difficile, and you see the other problems here. People with gout have a very distinct gut microbiome from people that don't have. We have the molecular techniques. We can start to identify those and then do the correction to change that effect. And you'll see that with inflammatory bowel diseases also. And then you get on to cancer, and one of the things that's brought a lot of publicity is the cancer trial in California. Monsanto even sued the state of California for putting it on their cancer list as the cause of cancer. Well, the problem was that at the same time that they did that, the law firm was also finding or getting discovery to a lot of Monsanto's own studies that had been shown to the EPA but hidden from the public and from scientific review. This is a study that they conducted in 1981. Monsanto's own study, set up following all the international protocols, using a Smith-Dolly rat, and you see that 23.8% of their animals that were on the low levels of glyphosate exposure developed malignant lymphomas. 0 in the controls. It's a very serious carcinogen. They tried to get funding blocked for IARC, for the World Health Organization, because they put it on, classed it as a probable carcinogen. Yet Monsanto's own studies documented that it's a very serious concern when almost 1/4 of the population develops a malignant lymphoma. You've got a pretty potent product there. It's just not an acute toxin. It's a chronic situation. We see this all the time. There's some data from Dr. Ted Dukemeyer in Canada. I had reported on 29 cases of animals that were dying. The farms were going into bankruptcy or close to it because of animal losses, and reported on some of those. In every case there, he has the glyphosate levels in the feed. They're all well below the levels that EPA says are perfectly safe. If you look at all of these diseases, we have 32 diseases human diseases that are approaching epidemic status. If you project those epidemiological curves for those diseases another 10 years, it would indicate that we're on the brink of the world's largest depopulation event ever recorded in the history of the world. Whether it's cancer, whether it's inflammatory bowel diseases, whether it's end-stage kidney disease, Alzheimer's, you see the life expectancy being shortened, and you see the disease occurrence much earlier than it ever occurred before. You see the epidemiological curve down here fits on a Pearson's correlation coefficient with the glyphosate exposure and GMO crops in all of those cases at 0.9 to 0.99 or higher. One being a direct cause-effect relationship. This is CDC's data for those diseases. What you see is two curves. You see the one line here, glyphosate was introduced in 1974, and you see it, if we project it on at the regular rates of glyphosate, it's a much lower slope than what happened when we released the genetically engineered crops resistant to glyphosate, so we could start dumping it right in our food. And you see then the curve, you see that second curve or second line going up, but they all fit the same product. They're on autism, certainly other factors that can synergize with the glyphosate, but you see that effect. You see the effect on end-stage kidney failure. I do a lot of consulting in Central America and South America. And one of the reasons we developed that nutrient ripener for sugarcane was so that we could avoid the tremendous losses, human losses, from end-stage kidney failure. You see, 1 in 4 sugarcane workers are expected to die this year from end-stage kidney failure. We have 20 people per day in the United States now that dies waiting for a kidney transplant. We have 5 dialysis satellite units in just the county that I'm in that didn't exist before 1990. You see all of that situation there with the indiscriminate use of glyphosate in our environment, in our system. So when you find yourself in a hole, the rule should be quit digging. What do we do when we find resistant weeds? We start increasing the rate of glyphosate. That's because as we increase the rate, we change the biology of the soil. We remove more of those protections, and we see more damage than occurring from it. Kind of give you a little light at the end of the tunnel with those 5 R's of correction, how to remediate, how to change the system, because we have to change. The epidemiological curves are projected. If it's not glyphosate, we've missed the cause, but the cause is going to still be there without some change. And these would be my 5 R's for correction. You've got to recognize the problem, remove the source. You do that only if you have labeling. We don't have labeling in the States. Europe, they do. I don't know about Australia. You don't either, do you?
Yes.
So,
I mean, in July.
okay.
Oh, okay.
So, but then you start changing. You start removing the source, removing that. You can vote with your pocketbook. But these are some of the things that we can do. The best is prevention. There are some materials that we know can remove glyphosate from the body. It accumulates in the brain, it accumulates in the bones, in the bone marrow, in your liver and kidney and heart, and other organs. It's a bioaccumulator. In spite of what Monsanto has because told everybody the science shows that it bioaccumulates in those tissues. We can remove it from all but the brain with humic acid or clinoptilolide, a form of zeolite. In Europe, they've been marketing these products now for about 10 years. In 4 weeks, 5 weeks, you can show that the levels in blood and the levels in urine are down below non-detectable levels, less than a tenth of a part per trillion with the HPLC tandem mass spec analysis. We've got to rebuild our soils, and as a last resort, you might say the fecal transplant is a lifesaver for many people, especially with C. difficile diarrhea. Clostridium difficile fatal in about 80% of the cases for people over 65 years of age. So it's a serious problem in our hospitals, a serious problem in our retirement homes, retirement centers. Because of that, a fecal transplant's 95% sure in that area. So that you see those effects. There's some probiotics that can be used, and most effective if they're used through a colonoscopy. You rarely get a probiotic from an oral route being able to colonize into the GI tract. We can do it once in a while with an enema, but usually requiring are much more effective with colonoscopy. There are some organisms. You look at the Acetobacter, and Rochelle mentioned Acetobacter in worm liquids here in the products. But in raw sauerkraut juice, Monica Kruger has shown that it'll remove the glyphosate, breaks down the glyphosate, actually, or in raw apple cider vinegar. So that the humic acid and clinoptilolide will entrap it, remove it through the feces rather than removing it through the kidney. So that you at least don't have the blockage in the kidney that you can get when glyphosate chelates with the minerals, because you're able to remove it a different pathway that way. But to break it down actually removes it then as a product in the digestive system as a whole. Again, you can't see it, taste it, smell it, but give it a little time and it can kill you. And so if I was to summarize, I would summarize that future historians may well look back and write about our time. Not about how many pounds of pesticides we did or did not apply, but about how willing we are to sacrifice our children and jeopardize future generations with this massive experiment that we call genetic engineering, that's based on false promises and flawed science, just to benefit the bottom line of the commercial enterprise. Yeah, and I've gone over my time here a little bit, but I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. There are many people who are very concerned. It's hard not to have that concern when you see, as I've seen, 3 of my neighbors die already this year from glyphosate-related diseases. I have 2 more that are reaching that final phase in life. When it touches your own family, get a little more concerned. Otherwise, we tend to be a complacent people. If it doesn't touch us, we say, well, I don't know what they did wrong. Sure glad I don't have to worry about it. If you look at those epidemiological curves, then go to a hospital and look at the maternity wards for the malformed children. Look at the increase in infertility. 40% of our population is estimated now to be unable in the childbearing age. have children. We're an endangered species. Not just because of glyphosate, because of its indiscriminate and widespread use and exposure is the primary culprit that we have to deal with. You say, yeah, aluminum or mercury in vaccines certainly synergize with it dramatically for autism. How are you going to handle the situation with your grandchildren and great-grandchildren, or even your children when the 1 out of 2 by 1932 were born with autism? No society that I know of, or any of my medical people that I work with, says no society can ever support that kind of a medical requirement. It's physically impossible. We have to change, and you're the ones that can start that. You are starting it. Many of you have already shifted to organic. Agriculture is the basic infrastructure of society. What happens in agriculture is going to determine what happens in the rest of society. How many doctors you have, how many teachers you have, how many days vacation are all dependent on the efficiency of that agricultural production of a healthy, nutritious, economically available source of that sustenance that we all have to have. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and share with you. Thank you.
Now, we do have time for questions, but I wanted to start our questions and discussion. Or does everyone want to have a quick stretch? Yep? Okay, 5 minutes. I'll give you 5 minutes and then we'll come back. All right.